The Tycoon came to evict the mother, but everything changed when he saw her with her 3 children. Some decisions are made in a single heartbeat, and they change the fate of 2 souls forever. On the dry plains of Texas, where the sun burns without mercy and hope fades with every passing day, a widowed mother clings to the only things she has left: her faith, her home, and her 3 children. But when a wealthy landowner arrives with an eviction notice in hand, no one could imagine what was about to happen. Because sometimes even the hardest heart can break under the right gaze. The August sun hangs low and heavy, melting into the endless horizon. Inside a weathered wooden cabin, Eveline Carter, 32, kneels by the fading glow of a dying fire. A small pot simmers with water and a few wilted vegetables. Her cracked hands tremble, not from cold but from fear. Behind her, 3 children sit quietly on the worn wooden floor. Clara, 9, holds her younger siblings close. Tommy, 6, and little Rose, just 4. Their eyes mirror their mother's, wide, unsure, afraid. They don't ask what's wrong. Children always know. Eveline breathes deeply. "The soup's almost ready, sweetheart," she whispers. But both of them know that soup won't fill the emptiness growing inside their stomachs. 3 months ago, her husband James died of a sudden fever. With him went their only source of income. Now Eveline washes clothes for the town's families when she can, and sells eggs from her 2 skinny hens, never enough to survive.
Each day feels like a slow battle between dignity and despair.
The debts keep growing like weeds after a storm. The bank has already sent 3 warnings, and that morning, something worse arrived. A letter stamped with the seal of the Western Railway Company. She keeps it folded in the pocket of her apron, but her fingers can't stop trembling. She's read it 20 times, and still she reads it again as if the words might somehow change. "Dear Mrs. Carter, you are hereby notified that the property located on Lot 17 of the Redwood District will be repossessed within 72 hours. Her breath catches. The letter slips from her hands. Outside, the sound of horse hooves begins to echo through the dust. The wind picks up. A black carriage stops in front of the cabin. From it steps a tall man in a dark suit, polished boots, a hat shadowing his eyes. In one hand, he holds the eviction papers. In the other, the beginning of a story he never saw coming. The evening wind pushed the dust as if it wanted to erase the footprints of fate from the earth. Eveline stood motionless on the threshold, her simple dress rippling around her legs, the little ones clutching the fabric as if the thread that bound them could somehow hold him back. The man in the dark suit lifted his eyes from the paper, and for a moment, just one, the language of power fell silent before the language of eyes. A metal train clanged on the distant track. The company that carried progress also carried away houses, stories, and names. "Mrs. Carter?" His voice cut through the quiet with a cold politeness, rehearsed many times in offices with heavy curtains. "I'm afraid I've come to carry out an eviction order." "I'm afraid." The phrase struck her chest. There was care in those words, and yet there was steel. Clara tightened her grip on her mother's fingers. Tommy drew a short breath as if air had suddenly grown expensive. Rose hid her face. Eveline straightened her back, proud despite the mended seams of her dress. "They can hear," she said, a strand of firm voice. "My children." He raised an eyebrow, looked over at the children, then removed his hat. The smallest gesture shifted the air. "My name is Nathaniel Whitford," he said, with a tiredness that didn't match the immaculate shine of his boots. "And yes, I see," he extended the paper. Eveline's hand didn't move. It wasn't that she didn't understand. Bold letters, official seals, merciless deadlines. It was the liturgy of men like Nathaniel. What she couldn't understand was where, in that chain of distant decisions, anyone had considered the smell of bread when James was alive. Rose's laugh as she chased the chickens. The way Tommy fell asleep gripping a piece of string like a ship's rope, ready to carry them away from fear. "I have 72 hours, she murmured, not as a question but as if measuring a cracked cup of water. "And after that?" Nathaniel drew a breath. Behind him, the driver pretended not to listen. The horses stamped impatiently. "After that, the company takes possession. The rails will be laid across this strip." "There's a larger plan, Mrs. Carter?" "A larger plan," she repeated, iron on her tongue. "And do my children fit in that plan?" His eyes flickered. He was a man accustomed to numbers, schedules, maps spread on tables. Eveline's face, however, wasn't a map. It was a field after the harvest, hard, worn, but still alive. He looked at the children. The oldest girl met his gaze, a small sentinel. The boy tried to look brave, but his hands gave away the tremor. The youngest, cheeks wet, edged out of hiding and studied the stranger as if she might read his soul. Nathaniel cleared his throat, unable to find the right paragraph. The company, there will be compensation. A sum for this land. It isn't without. He stopped, feeling the weight of that empty phrase in the hot air. Eveline turned her face inward where the thin smell of soup still insisted. James died 3 months ago, she said without dramatics, laying a truth on the table and leaving it there. This house is what remains of who we were. A faint tremor went along Nathaniel's jaw. He wasn't afraid of tears. He feared above all the dignity that refused to be bought. He folded the paper, measured the distance between them. A rug of dust. 3 children's breaths, a silence you don't learn in books. Mrs. Carter, I didn't come to cause you pain. Lies and truths are sometimes born twins. I came to fulfill a duty. But I can... He paused, surprised by the offer rising without authorization from his superiors. I can return tomorrow, explain better, see if there's... food? Eveline cut in, looking at the children. Work? A place where the word plan isn't a synonym for lose everything? Nathaniel closed his eyes for a second. He remembered the office, the map with pins, the red line of the rails cutting through counties, the director's voice speaking of efficiency, progress, shareholders. He remembered himself at 10, kneeling on the floor of his father's house, trying not to cry when the farm was taken for debts. His mother, hands rough from washing clothes, had stood in the doorway too, like Eveline now. The past came back like dust in his eyes. Don't let memory make you weak, his father used to say. Forge it into steel. He held his hat against his chest, a nearly reverent gesture. Tomorrow at sunrise, he said. I'll return and... He searched for a sentence that wasn't a promise and wasn't a dodge either. Listen, you don't have to sign anything tonight. Eveline nodded without thanking him. Gratitude was a luxury. What she could offer in that moment was the right to leave with his conscience intact. Nathaniel set his hat back on, turned halfway, and walked to the carriage. Before climbing up, he looked again. He saw the gourd of water hanging by the jamb. He saw the little boots lined up near the door. He saw life's stubbornness in a house as fragile as a prayer and as strong as a mother. The carriage rolled off. Eveline called the children inside. She served the soup in silence, as if sharing not a meal but a certainty. As long as there was a roof and 3 warm bodies close to hers, there was reason to rise the next day. Mom, is he going to take our house? Tommy asked, balancing the spoon carefully. Eveline laid her hand on his hair. I don't know, sweetheart, but I know I won't let go of you. Clara looked at her mother over the rim of the bowl, her chin set. I can work. I can wash. I can sell cakes. Mrs. Holloway pays for loaves on Sundays. You're a child. Eveline smiled faintly, pride that hurt. And children deserve to sleep without counting the bank's warnings. Rose leaned her head against her mother's arm and fell asleep between 2 spoonfuls. The fire crackled, and outside night came like a sheet that covers wounds without healing them. In the front room, when the children were breathing in the soft rhythm of sleep, Eveline opened the window and stared at the dark silhouette of town. The rail glinted faintly under the moon, a blade line ready to make fine, precise cuts, a larger plan. Not even God, she thought, revealed his plans that way. At least he gave signs and seeds in rain and births. Men's plans came stamped and dated. She folded the letter with the calm of someone folding a dress for a funeral. Then she brought it near the flame and for 1 second wanted to watch it all turn to ash. She didn't. Truth needs to exist so that courage knows what it's fighting. At the Dustin Hotel, Nathaniel removed his tie like a knot that strangled not his neck but his soul. They served him meat, potatoes, a wine more expensive than the ground that would be born under the rails. He chewed without hunger. Every bite carried back the image of the threshold. 3 children framed by the dusk. The woman standing, a quiet tornado. There was no room for tears in a man like him, but there was room for memory, and memories bother more than pain. Mr. Whitford, the local director's voice burst through the door. So how did it go? It went, Nathaniel answered curtly. 72 hours. The director tapped his watch. I want confirmation by Friday. The freight train needs to cross those lands before next month. Nathaniel nodded. When the man left, he loosened his collar further. Before next month. The urgent matters of the rich always seemed more urgent than the breathing of the poor. He finally lay down and sleep came uneven, full of horse hooves and children's eyes watching him over bowls of soup. At dawn, when the rooster crowed and the first light edged the shapes of things, Eveline was already up. She kneaded flour with water, baked small loaves, set aside 2 to sell and 1 for each child. The smell of fresh bread shamed the poverty for a few minutes, like a Sunday insisting on living through Monday. Tommy woke first, eyes bright at the sight of the bread. "Is it a party?" "It's bread," Eveline answered, laughing softly. "And bread is always a party." Clara helped her fill the bucket with water from the well. Rose, her hair cloud soft, dragged her blanket and hugged her mother around the waist. The house, despite everything, was a breathing body. When the carriage wheels sliced the morning, Eveline was already outside, clean apron, tight braid, chin lifted. Nathaniel stepped down, bringing not just papers but an expression that, if not altogether different, had been touched by something the city didn't sell. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." "Good morning, Mr. Whitford." He didn't offer the paper this time. "I'd like to talk," he began, "about possibilities." The word possibilities landed carefully between them like a wary bird. Eveline led him to the shade of the porch. The children stayed near, circling, listening without learning to eavesdrop. "There's a company fund," Nathaniel began, the cadence of a negotiator in his voice, "for compensation and relocation. It won't fix everything, but it doesn't buy roots," Eveline finished, gentle and sharp. "No," he admitted, "but it can buy time. And time sometimes buys miracles." She looked up, surprised by the confession. His lines usually stood on foundations of calculation. This one had shingles of hope. Nathaniel cleared his throat, regaining posture. "I can also," he went on, choosing his words like stones to cross a river, "offer temporary work if you wish. The company needs hands to wash, cook, sew." "I know you." He looked at her hands, lifelines like scars. "Can do many things." Eveline almost laughed, not out of scorn, but at the quiet miracle of hearing a man in a suit recognize the value of cracked hands. "Work doesn't scare me," she said. "What scares me is accepting work that steals my house while it gives me a loaf." "Sometimes," Nathaniel answered, unsure where the courage in his voice came from. "Accepting the loaf today is how you don't starve before you can get another house tomorrow." There was a silence. The horses tossed their heads. Flies buzzed like insistent thoughts. Clara, without meaning to, blurted, "Mama makes the best bread in the county." Nathaniel smiled, quick and sincere, like someone saved by a simple truth. "I believe it." Eveline shot her daughter a light look of reproach which dissolved into a gesture of affection. "Sit," she said to Nathaniel. "Let's talk about what you call time and what I call a future." He sat, and there between life and the plan, something began that no memo would record. 2 people tracing with few words and many silences, the uncertain cartography of a possible miracle. The children played a few steps away, drawing rivers and fences in the dirt with a stick. Meanwhile, Eveline and Nathaniel, sitting on the porch, drew another kind of map, one that needed to fit both into account books and into the hearts of those who stayed behind. The smell of bread warmed the air between them, softening sharp edges. "The company will pay a fixed sum per acre," Nathaniel said, reciting the number he'd learned to say the way one recites a prayer. "In addition, we can cover the transport to a new home farther south where the rails won't pass." "A home I've never seen," Eveline replied. "A place where my husband isn't buried, where my children don't know the name of the wind, and where the wind might not carry bank warnings," he countered, then bit his tongue for letting the irony slip. "Forgive me. The truth is more useful than an apology," she said without resentment. "The wind's already full of those." Nathaniel leaned forward, forearms on his knees, the paper still untouched. "What do you want, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, honest and unadorned. "If we take away for a moment what's inevitable, what do you want?" Eveline didn't answer right away. To want for the poor is a suspicious verb. It smells of luxury, even of sin. But there were legitimate desires, clean as spring water. To want her children to eat without counting bites. To want Rose to have shoes before winter came. To want laughter that wasn't rushed. To want above all that the name Carter not become a synonym for pity. "I want time," she said finally. "Time to sell my hens for a fair price. Time to finish harvesting the corn that's still standing. Time to find a place that isn't just far away, but ours. 30 days. Nathaniel frowned. 30 days was time a freight train didn't have. It meant delays, penalties, reports written in red ink. And yet, when he looked up, he saw Clara braiding her little sister's hair with the same careful fingers as their mother. Saw Tommy arranging small stones as if they were soldiers defending invisible borders. 30 days suddenly had faces. 15, he countered out of habit like in the boardroom. 15 days and I personally guarantee the company will provide a wagon, supplies, and an advance in cash so you can start over. And, the thought reckless and generous surfaced whole, I'll bring carpenters, my own men, to reinforce your house while the days pass. Not so it lasts forever, he admitted, but so the time you asked for can be lived with dignity. Eveline went very still. A negotiation is also a way to measure someone's soul. 21, she said at last, her voice low. And you take half the bread I bake. I don't want charity. I want exchange. He stared at her, surprised to realize that at that instant he felt less like an emissary of a company and more like a man accepting an ancient pact. 21, he agreed. And I'll take the bread. The deal sewn together, the conversation changed tone. The thread of hostility loosened, giving way to an unexpected warmth. Nathaniel asked about James, how he used to laugh when the rain finally came. Eveline asked where the man in the suit came from, and found a farm lost to memory and a boy who had learned early that feelings don't pay bills. By the time morning was nearly noon, he stood to leave. I'll return this evening with 2 things, he said. The advance and the men to reinforce the house and... He hesitated, almost shy. If you'll allow me, I'll bring an empty basket that I hope to fill with bread. Eveline felt something warm a place that wasn't her stomach. Bring the basket, she answered. He tipped his hat. Before climbing into the carriage, he knelt without ceremony to meet Tommy's eyes. You've got a strong army there. Tommy straightened up. I'm protecting the house. Good, said Nathaniel, serious. But don't forget to protect your mother, too. Sometimes generals forget who feeds them. Tommy nodded, taking those words as if they were a sword. The carriage rolled away. The dust took its time settling, as if it wanted to prolong Nathaniel's presence. Eveline sighed. The sound of someone setting down a weight only to pick up another. The weight of work waiting inside. She rolled up her sleeves and began sweeping, scrubbing, shaking out the laundry. What depended on her would not fail. That afternoon, word spread through the town in the form of glances. Neighbors at their fences, men pausing mid-page to lick a finger and turn it, while sneaking a look at the house up on the rise. The magnate at the Carter's place, they whispered. Maybe she begged him. Maybe he's not as cruel as they say. Maybe he is. Small towns feed on maybes. Clara, under her mother's watchful eye, went to Mrs. Holloway with a basket of smaller loaves. She returned with coins and a handful of compliments that couldn't buy a wagon, but could feed the hunger for respect. Rose chased a butterfly, laughed, fell, got up again. Tommy watered the stubborn zucchini plants with a tin cup, as if offering drink to weary soldiers. When the light began to turn gold, Nathaniel's carriage reappeared, this time followed by a wagon loaded with planks and tools. 4 men climbed down, 2 carpenters, 1 helper, and a young man with quick eyes carrying, with exaggerated care, an empty wicker basket. Where would you like the beams, ma'am? One of them asked, respectful as a churchgoer. Where the rain gets through, Eveline replied, pointing to the leaks in the roof. And where the wind sings too loud, the men smiled. Nathaniel stood aside, supervising without the arrogance of before. Sometimes he stretched an arm to hold a beam, his tie forgotten at the hotel, unbothered by sweat. The bright-eyed boy handed Eveline the basket. The boss said to bring it empty but hopeful, he said, as if quoting poetry. I've never seen a hopeful basket before, but here it is. Eveline laughed. Then it'll learn. While the hammer kept rhythm, Eveline mixed flour, water, salt, and memory. The smell of baking bread rose along with the sound of planks being fitted. The house seemed to straighten its own pride. The children watched, amazed at the simple choreography of people who knew what they were doing. When the loaves came out golden, Clara spread a cloth over the table. Eveline filled the basket. Half for the workers, half for Nathaniel to keep his part of the bargain. The carpenters bit into their bread with a pleasure that can't be bought. One of them closed his eyes. My mother made it like this, he said, voice distant, traveling back in time. Nathaniel received his share and for a moment didn't seem to know what to do. The simple gesture of a woman handing him bread, not as favor, not as humiliation. When fear arrives, people gather. Tommy grabbed his stick sword. Clara, the chalk. Rose, her blanket. Eveline, her hands. At dawn, the house woke before the sun. Neighbors came, some out of solidarity, others for the hunger of spectacle that lives in every small town. The widows brought chairs. The pastor brought a prayer. The blacksmith an extra nail. Mrs. Holloway loaves of bread. Mrs. Collins blankets. Someone drew a white line across the dirt. They stop here. Useless and powerful like the first flags. When the dust on the horizon announced Pierce's party, a quietness fell. That charged kind of silence that comes before a great rain. Eveline placed Rose on her hip, Tommy at her side, Clara a step ahead. Nathaniel stood to Eveline's left, not taking the center. That house had its commander, and it wasn't him. The group of men dismounted, boots hard on the earth. Pierce at the front, his smile now only a blade. "Good morning," he said, courteous as a gravedigger. "We have work to do." "We do," Nathaniel answered. "The work of not turning people into rubble." Pierce didn't entertain poetry. "Men," he ordered. Two stepped forward with papers and hammers to mark the wood. They reached the wall, the same wall that had felt Nathaniel's hand, and raised their arms. That's when they heard, "Not today." Clara's voice wasn't a shout. It was a bell. The men froze, not because of the sound, but because of what followed, a crowd turning its whole body toward them. The widow stepped forward. The pastor lifted a psalm. The blacksmith struck his hammer against iron, making the kind of noise that unnerves. Pierce smiled, condescending. "Very moving." "But," he raised his hand again. Nathaniel stepped forward. "There's a proposal on the mayor's desk," he said, mixing truth and bluff. "A 1.5-degree curve. It'll cost less than the lawsuit the company will face for tearing down a house with children inside, in full view of the town." The word lawsuit was a high card. Pierce hesitated. The calculation ran through him like numbers on an abacus. "There's no legal basis," he said, but with less certainty. "There's a moral one," said the pastor softly, but with the weight of 100 Sundays. "And there are witnesses," added Mrs. Collins, holding up a notebook and pen. "Names, dates, words." Pierce looked around. It wasn't just a house now. It was a story being written with eyes. Calling in reinforcements would cost time and reputation. Backing down would cost money and pride. And yet, there stood a company man, Nathaniel, right on the wrong side of the line. If his name fell in the wrong place, it would echo upstairs. Pierce took a breath, weighing losses like a jeweler weighs gold. Finally, he said, 3 days. He held up 3 fingers as if granting magnanimously what had in truth been taken from him. 3 days, Nathaniel repeated, each syllable a plank laid on a bridge. Pierce gathered his men. "I'll return with an answer," he said. It was a threat, too. He climbed back into the carriage. Before leaving, he shot Nathaniel a look that said, "You owe me." Nathaniel returned one that said, "I owe them." When the dust settled, Eveline's knees buckled. She sat on the step. Her hands trembled but didn't fall. Nathaniel knelt beside her, his jacket covered in dust like a humble robe that somehow suited him. "It's not over," he said plainly. "But today, yes." He pointed to the doorboard where Clara had written, "Today, no." Eveline nodded. The children, who had held their breath too long, released it in laughter that turned to tears. They laughed and cried together, and there is no stronger prayer than that. That night, under the trembling lamplight, Eveline and Nathaniel spoke of after the way one speaks of a faraway country. They made no plans that required miracles, only steps that required hands. If the curve came, there'd be a home. If not, there'd be a road. But a road with a wagon, provisions, a network of neighbors, letters of recommendation written by Nathaniel himself. He'd sign each page with a hand that now trembled less from calculation and more from courage. "And," he ventured, swallowing a new kind of fear, "if you allow me, when the house is safe, I'd like to come back to—" He searched for a word that wouldn't intrude. "To eat bread at your table." "Come back," Eveline said, the word simple because it had already been true in her body for days. Bread is better when the one who eats it has a name. The next 3 days were thick with waiting. The mayor signed papers. The landowner made phone calls through favors. The pastor wrote an article for the local paper. The widow stitched a makeshift flag, a piece of bedsheet with an embroidered ear of corn in the center, and around it, 3 small hands and 1 large. The blacksmith donated the mast. Clara chose the spot, the porch corner where the wind could read the message. On the morning of the 3rd day, another carriage arrived. It wasn't Pierce. It was a messenger with an envelope, thick paper, dark ink. Nathaniel opened it. He read once, twice, 3 times. His silence stretched like a rope. Eveline, standing a step away, pressed her palms until they hurt. Finally, he lifted his eyes. "The curve's been approved," he said, his voice breaking only at the end. 1.5 degrees. The house stays. The word stays didn't fall and it flew. Rose clapped. Tommy raised his stick like a sword that had won its battle. Clara ran to the doorboard and wrote, "Today, yes." The widows wept openly. The pastor said amen with the taste of bread in his mouth. The blacksmith let out a laugh that sounded like a bell. Eveline sat on the threshold, tears hot, hands over her face, breath made of sobs and laughter. Nathaniel beside her took off his hat as one does when entering a sanctuary. It wasn't the triumph of the mighty. It was the victory of the small, which always feels greater because it fits inside small places. Later, when the simple celebration ended, bread, broth, stories, Nathaniel stayed to collect dishes, as if unlearning how to be served. Eveline watched, gratitude mixed with something that didn't rush. She came closer. "Thank you," she said at last, using the word she had saved for when the miracle stopped being only a possibility. "I should be thanking you," he replied, and they both laughed at the reversal that wasn't a reversal at all but balance. The sun sank behind the hill, painting the sky the same color as the shawl Eveline hadn't yet worn, a blue that kept promises. The children slept piled like puppies. The world, for a rare instant, seemed to fit inside a small house with a patched roof and a homemade flag. "What will become of us?" Eveline asked, and without fear, without hurry. Nathaniel thought of the northern branch he had refused, the straight line he had helped to bend, the barefoot boy inside him finally accepting the sound of a bucket as the music of home. He thought, then said, "If it's up to me, it'll be—" He searched for the word, "honest." Eveline smiled. "Then let it be." They didn't kiss. They didn't promise forever. They sat side by side, shoulders almost touching, the night learning their names. And when days later the first train passed and the rails groaned softly through the new curve, no one inside the carriages knew that by a mere 1.5 degrees, a possible love was breathing. But the important things are almost always like that. Silent, stubborn, and determined to last.